In the year 1485, English was a localized, unstable vernacular, confined to an island on the periphery of Europe. Across the continent, Latin operated as the dominant language of scholarship, religion, and diplomacy. While the Italian peninsula had already produced monumental, world-defining texts like Dante's Divine Comedy centuries earlier, England remained culturally isolated, lacking a unified linguistic identity to project outward. Yet within a span of 150 years, this unstable dialect produced an explosion of literary masterpieces. Writers like William Shakespeare and Edmund Spenser built a literary canon that would eventually circle the globe. This boom is often misremembered as a spontaneous generation of artistic talent, solitary geniuses suddenly writing masterpieces in candlelit rooms. That is a myth. The English Renaissance was a deliberate, engineered, socio-technical project. It was the direct result of three distinct historical shocks that forced a marginalized island to rapidly manufacture a national identity. Three specific historical forces powered this cultural engine: the technological shock of the printing press, the ideological fracture of Protestantism, and the pedagogical rise of Renaissance humanism. By analyzing these three pillars, we can map exactly how literature was used to manufacture a unified English identity out of political chaos. Texts like The Faerie Queene or Hamlet cannot be fully understood in a vacuum. We have to examine the industrial and political machinery that necessitated their creation. During the 16th century, literature was deployed as foundational national infrastructure. The mechanical foundation of this engine arrived in the 1470s, when William Caxton introduced the printing press to England. Before the press, bookmaking was a laborious process of hand-copying parchment, heavily monopolized by the church. Printing permanently broke this monopoly, dropping the cost of reproduction and making mass-market reading in the local vernacular possible. This technological capacity collided with an ideological fracture. In 1534, Henry VIII passed the Act of Supremacy, severing England's ties with the Roman Catholic Church. This sudden political and religious isolation meant England was surrounded by hostile European powers. To survive, the state had to construct a distinct, non-Roman cultural identity. This page from Tyndale's translation of the New Testament shows how the state weaponized the printing press for this new religious identity. By printing the Gospel of John in colloquial English, reading, "In the beginning was the Word," the text was suddenly accessible. Translating the Bible into the local language shifted theological power away from the priesthood in Rome and placed it directly into the hands of individual readers. This title page for the Book of Common Prayer illustrates the enforcement of this new vernacular. Produced by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, it mandated the use of the English language across the country through standardized, daily state-sanctioned worship. The fusion of the printing press and the Protestant schism created the first true mass market for English text, laying the material bedrock for a widespread literary culture. The 16th century also introduced severe social instability. London's population surged, and a new class of wealthy merchants began acquiring property, threatening the traditional aristocratic monopoly on power. The aristocracy responded by adopting Renaissance humanism to establish civility, manners, and classical education as the new baseline for ruling class legitimacy, rather than relying solely on land ownership or wealth. Instruction manuals like Thomas Eliot's The Book Named the Governor explicitly trained the elite in this new standard. Young gentlemen were taught to use Latin, rhetoric, and literature as practical, exclusionary tools for statecraft and diplomacy. This illustration demonstrates the philosophy used to justify this strict hierarchy, the great chain of being. Looking at the structure of this tree, we see a rigid natural order, starting at the bottom with inanimate stones, moving up to beasts, and reaching upward toward humanity. Writers deployed this concept to argue that the social order was mathematically ordained by God. Disrupting your social class, or rebelling against the monarch, was a violation of cosmic natural law. Humanist education and this hierarchical philosophy transformed literature into a mechanism for enforcing social obedience and protecting aristocratic privilege from the rising merchant class. With print, religion, and education established as foundational pillars, the engine began to generate new literary outputs. The first was extended non-verse writings, prose.
Writers channeled humanist principles into visionary political prose, using the format to openly critique the poverty, unjust laws, and systemic failures of the old European world. This document from Thomas More's Utopia is the prime example of applying Renaissance rationality to imagine a highly regulated, non-exploitative society. By inventing a fictional alphabet and engaging in meticulous world-building, More disguised a radical political critique of 16th century England. At the other end of the spectrum, this high-minded philosophical prose shared the printing press with an explosion of gritty, mass-produced pamphlets. Writers like Robert Greene churned out tracts documenting London's criminal subcultures, con artists, and street-level deceit. English prose became the primary laboratory for both elite political speculation and rapid-fire popular journalism. The second output of this engine was poetry. English poets began hybridizing imported European poetic structure to exploit their own native political anxieties. Writers like Thomas Wyatt and the Earl of Surrey imported the Italian Petrarchan sonnet and invented English blank verse. This strict formatting elevated the vernacular, proving English could match the formal rigor of classical Latin. Edmund Spenser's epic poem, The Faerie Queene, represents the ultimate synthesis of these poetic and political forces. Spenser engineered a multi-layered moral and political allegory. The knights and monsters in his text were explicitly designed to glorify the Tudor state, casting Queen Elizabeth as a deified, virtuous ruler, triumphing over Catholic enemies. This map from Britannia shows the era's antiquarian obsession with the landscape. By cataloging these illustrated historical figures and Anglo-Saxon lineages along the borders, writers and cartographers claimed ancient British legends to legitimize the current monarch's rule. Elizabethan poetry functioned as state-sponsored myth-making, designed to grant a politically isolated English monarchy an epic cultural lineage. The final and most highly visible output of the cultural engine was Elizabethan commercial drama. During the Reformation, the government banned overtly Catholic mystery plays. To survive, the theater had to evolve away from religious instruction and reconstruct itself as a strictly secular, commercial enterprise. The theater moved past simple medieval morality plays, where characters represented abstract concepts like goodness or vice, and began constructing characters with individual psychological depth. In works like Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, dramatists adopted Roman Senecan violence. They used ghosts, revenge plots, and on-stage murders to thrill a newly urbanized, paying mass audience. The Elizabethan stage succeeded precisely because it merged the new humanist psychological depth with the raw, visceral spectacle demanded by the commercial public. Prose, poetry, and drama functioned as interconnected outputs of the same socio-technical system. The writers of this era were responding directly to existential threats. They were navigating the trauma of the plague, religious volatility, and severe political isolation. When we read Sidney, Spenser, or Shakespeare, we are reading the codified output of an entire society actively inventing its modern identity.